My grandfather never told scary stories when I was a kid. He was the kind of man who liked to talk about tractors, baseball, or the weather, and if you asked him what scared him, he'd probably just chuckle and say, "Not a damn thing." That changed during my first college break. He'd gotten sick, wasn't terminal, but it was enough to slow him down. We sat on his old porch swing one muggy night in East Texas, watching lightning bugs drift above the grass. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked me if I believed in witches. I said yeah, jokingly. I expected him to laugh. He didn't. He looked out toward the tree line behind the field, lips drawn tight. "I don't mean broomsticks and fairy tales," he said. "I'm talking about real witches." Then he told me about the 3 times he saw her. The first time was in 1951. He was 10 years old, playing with his younger siblings in the pasture behind the farmhouse. It was just before sundown, the time of day when the shadows stretch and the sky turns bruised and orange. He was chasing his little brother when something made him stop cold. At the edge of the woods, about 200 yards away, there was a figure. A woman, maybe, or something that looked like one. Just a black shape, floating a few inches off the ground. No features, no movement. But what he remembered most was the head. It was cocked sideways at an exact 90-degree angle, like it had been snapped and left dangling. And even from that distance, he knew it was looking at him. He grabbed his siblings and dragged them inside, yelling for his parents. They didn't see anything, but they believed him. Enough, at least, that they didn't let the kids play past sunset after that. He said the whole house felt different after that day, like the woods had grown closer. The second encounter came 2 years later. He was 12. Back then, the kids walked to school on foot. The closest neighbor was over a mile away, and the trail through the woods was the fastest route. His walking partner was a boy named Shane who lived on the next property. One morning, they were walking home through the forest, joking and tossing pine cones at each other, when they saw someone on the trail ahead. It was a person wrapped in quilts, multiple layers, dirty and heavy, like they hadn't been washed in years. The figure shuffled slowly, dragging their feet along the dirt path. At first, my grandfather thought it was a homeless person, but there was something wrong. The figure didn't react when they called out, didn't look up, just kept walking. And then came the smell. He said it hit them like a wave, rot and sour and something chemical, like mold and bile and gasoline. Shane vomited immediately. My grandfather said his vision blurred, and he started stumbling, dizzy and sick. Then, just as the figure passed them on the trail, it let out a giggle. Not a human laugh. Something warped. Like a child imitating a grown woman, or an animal trying to copy a sound it had only heard once. They turned to look, and it started running. The bundle of quilts dropped and tangled as it sprinted after them, revealing flashes of skin and twisted limbs beneath. They ran for the farmhouse, screaming the whole way. They made it to the porch. My grandfather's mother pulled them inside, slammed the door, and locked it. She didn't ask questions. She must have seen the fear in their faces. They never saw Shane again. The next day, his family said he'd left, just packed up and moved without warning. But my grandfather knew that wasn't true. Shane's dog was still there. His clothes. His bike. Only Shane was gone. The whole town whispered about it for weeks. They started warning kids not to go into the woods alone. Some called it superstition. Others nodded quietly and kept their doors locked after dark. The final time was years later. My grandfather was 17, a senior in high school, and by then he was something of a local legend. He was fast, smart, a star football player set to play for the University of Oklahoma. He had his whole life planned out. He said that made her appearance even worse. It happened after prom. The class was small, 60 students, maybe, so everyone ended up at the same bonfire in the woods to celebrate. It was deep out past the back roads, surrounded by pine trees so thick you could barely see the stars. My grandfather had been drinking, though he swore not much. He stepped away from the group to take a leak behind some trees. That's when he saw it. Smoke. A thin stream rising from a chimney, maybe 100 yards deeper into the forest. There shouldn't have been anyone out there. It was private land, and the area had been abandoned for decades. But the smell hit him before the fear did, that same foul, chemical rot from when he was 12. He followed it. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was some part of him that needed to know. But he left the fire and crept toward the smoke. He found a hut. Handmade. Crude. Branches and rusted metal, with a blackened chimney that coughed up smoke like a dying throat. He took one step closer, and then she appeared. He couldn't describe her face. He said it was like trying to focus on smoke. But she was tall, hunched, and radiating a pressure he could feel in his skull. And she was whispering, whispers that slithered into his ears like needles. He said the whispering got louder and louder until it wasn't just sound, it was pain, like fire under his skin. He clutched his arm and felt something hot and sharp, like metal branding his flesh. He screamed. Then the figure faded into the woods. He turned to run, but the trees had moved. The bonfire was nowhere in sight. He was deep in the forest, far from any path. He ran anyway, stumbled, fell. He said he cried, pissed himself, didn't care, just screamed for help. Eventually, he found the fire again. Or it found him. His friend said he'd been gone 15 minutes. But when the police came the next day and investigated the hut, they found something worse. Dead animals, bones, human remains. And in the ashes of the hearth, they found a necklace that had belonged to Shane. They never figured out who lived there. The hut was burned by the sheriff's department. No one claimed the remains. And a week later, my grandfather left town. He never told anyone except me. And for the rest of his life, he wore long sleeves, even in the summer. But once, when I was little, I saw it. A twisted burn mark on his forearm, almost like a brand. It looked like an eye. He passed away last year. But sometimes, when I visit his old house, I look out at the tree line, and I wonder if she's still there, waiting. I work in conservation and wildlife management for the state of Texas. Most of the job is unglamorous: trail clearing, invasive plant removal, mapping habitats. Occasionally, there's something exciting, like tagging bobcats or relocating gators. But mostly, it's just long hours in remote places with bad signal and worse roads. That's what brought me to Jasper County last summer. The land was part of a state grant initiative, reclaim a large stretch of forest that had been overrun with Chinese privet, a fast-growing invasive plant choking out native vegetation. The site was deep, about 11 miles from the nearest paved road, and bordered a stretch of wilderness that had never been fully surveyed. There were two of us on the team, me and Troy. He was a few years older, strong, quiet, and more comfortable with a machete than a map. We were dropped off with 4 days' worth of supplies, a satellite phone, and strict instructions to stay within the flag boundary. It should have been a routine job, but nothing about that forest was routine. The first day was hot, slow, and filled with the buzz of mosquitoes and brush blades hacking through green. The privet was worse than expected, tangled, thick, and growing in unnatural clusters. Not in lines or patches, but in circles. Troy even joked about it. Like someone planted him on purpose, he said, wiping sweat from his brow. That night, we made camp near a dry creek bed. The frogs were loud, and the tree canopy blocked most of the stars. We talked for a bit, then crashed early. At some point past midnight, I woke up to a sound I couldn't place. Not an animal, not wind. It was a voice, distant but clear. A woman's voice, whispering something rhythmic, over and over. Too far to make out the words, but close enough to hear the pattern. I sat up, unzipped the tent, and scanned the woods with my headlamp. Nothing. I chalked it up to a dream. The next morning, I didn't mention it. We got back to work, clearing another few acres. Around noon, Troy stopped suddenly and called me over. There was a tree in front of him. It looked familiar, tall pine, split in the center like a tuning fork. He pointed at the base. We'd marked it yesterday. Spray paint and ribbon. But we were miles from where we started. He looked at me, confused. We came from the opposite direction, he said. Right? I nodded, and we both went quiet. We marked the tree again, made sure of our bearings, and kept working. But later that afternoon, I turned and saw it again. The same tree, same paint, same ribbon. We weren't going in circles. The tree was following us. That night, the whispers came back, louder this time. Troy heard them too. I saw him sit upright, flashlight already in hand, scanning the woods in slow, controlled movements. Neither of us said anything. We just listened. The voice repeated a phrase again and again, soft and low, like a lullaby in a language we didn't know. It circled the camp, never closer, never farther. Eventually it stopped. Neither of us slept. The next morning, we made a decision. Get out. We didn't call it fear. We didn't say it out loud. But we both knew. Something was wrong with that place. The GPS wouldn't lock. The compass spun slowly, even when we were standing still. We packed up, picked a direction, and hiked. We walked all day, only stopping once for water. No breaks. No chatter. Just a mutual, silent understanding that we needed to get out of those woods. Around dusk, we found a clearing. At the center was a massive oak tree, blackened and dead, branches snapped and curled like claws. Beneath it sat Troy's pack, neatly zipped, perfectly placed. But Troy was gone. I spun around, calling his name. No answer. Just the rustle of leaves and my own breath in my ears. I checked the surrounding trees. No broken branches. No signs of struggle. Then I saw it. The pine tree. The one with the split trunk. The one that had been following us. It was here too, just standing at the edge of the clearing. I don't remember running, but I must have, because the next thing I knew, I was face down in the underbrush, shaking and gasping. The pack was still in my hands. Inside was the sat phone. I called for evac, gave coordinates, told them it was urgent. They found me 2 hours later, huddled in a shallow ditch near the road, barefoot and covered in scratches I didn't remember getting. But that's not the worst part. That came later. They found Troy the next day. He was sitting at the base of that same tree, alive, but catatonic, eyes wide open, lips moving soundlessly, rocking gently back and forth. He was impaled. A thick, sharpened branch had gone straight through his thigh, pinning him to the tree like an insect. But he wasn't bleeding. The wound looked cauterized, sealed like it had been burned shut. He didn't react when they pulled it out, didn't scream, didn't move. He still hasn't spoken since. 3 more teams were sent in after that. 2 turned back within hours, citing equipment failure and navigation inconsistencies. The 3rd found something worse. A clearing filled with abandoned boots. Dozens of them. All pointed toward the same tree. That pine with the split trunk. They put a flag on the area and closed off Parcel 6 permanently. Classified it as unstable terrain. Public danger. But I've looked at the satellite images. That tree is still there. The ground around it is always clear, no undergrowth, no moss, not even leaves. Like the forest is afraid to get too close. And sometimes, when the wind cuts just right and the static clears on the radio, I swear I still hear her, whispering, waiting, calling someone else into the trees. I never talk about what happened in that house. Not to therapists, not to my family. Not even to myself, if I can help it. But it's been 10 years now. I think I've earned the right to speak it aloud, once. It started with a flyer. One of those cheap, glossy ones handed out at gas stations and high school football games. It was for a haunted house attraction called the 13th Floor. I know. Sounds like every other horror-themed thrill ride, right? That's what we thought too. A gimmicky pop-up in the middle of nowhere. But this one was different. First of all, it was free. No entry fee. Just sign a waiver and you were in. Second, it didn't have a set location. You couldn't just Google it. You had to find it. And people did find it, by word of mouth or luck, or by following strange directions that showed up only after dark. That's how it found us. It was October, a dry, windless night in rural Texas. There were 5 of us. Me, my fiancée Rachel, our friend Dave, and a couple we hung out with sometimes, Morgan and Leo. We just left another haunted house, still amped up and laughing about how lame it was. That's when Dave pulled the flyer from his jacket pocket. "Let's do a real one," he said. The flyer had only 2 things on it. A blurry picture of a staircase and the words, "Survive all 13 floors and win." No address. Just coordinates and a note that said, "Don't be late." The coordinates led us down an old service road deep in the woods, barely wide enough for a single car. There were no lights. No signs. No signal. Then, suddenly, it was just there. A squat, windowless building with black paneling and a red neon, 13, buzzing over the door. No cars. No people. We should have left. But the door opened by itself. And we went in. The entry room was pitch black, except for a man at a folding table with a clipboard and 5 wristbands. He didn't say hello. Just handed us forms to sign. It was the most generic waiver I'd ever seen. No specific dangers listed. Just the phrase, "We are not responsible for what happens inside." We joked about it. Laughed too loud, the way people do when they're hiding nerves. Rachel looked at me and whispered, "Something feels off." I wish we'd listened to her. He put wristbands on each of us, numbered 1 through 5. I was number 3. Then he opened the door behind him and said 2 words. "Good luck." The first few floors were exactly what you'd expect. Dim lights, fake fog, loudspeakers, strobe lights. Standard stuff. Room 1 was a butcher shop. Room 2 had flickering dolls. Room 3, a corridor of mirrors. But by floor 4, things started to shift. The walls were wet. Not painted to look wet, actually dripping. Room 5 had no sound effects. No actors. Just a hospital room filled with broken equipment. Rachel swore the heart monitor was following her with its beep. In room 6, Dave slipped on the floor and cursed. When I helped him up, his hand was bleeding. We thought it was from a prop until we looked down and saw the broken glass had been embedded in the floor. No rubber edges. No stage dressing. It wasn't fake. That's when we started to panic. At room 7, Morgan said she was done. She tried to turn around and go back through the last door. It was gone. The wall was seamless. We banged on it, screamed, but there was no response. No one came. No emergency exit signs, no cameras. We had no choice but to keep going forward. Room 8 was cold, freezing. Our breath came out in clouds, and the walls were lined with meat hooks. Not plastic, not rubber, metal. One of them was dripping. In the middle of the room was a bag suspended from a hook. It was moving. We didn't look inside. Room 9 was worse. Pitch black. The kind of dark that swallows your thoughts. We had to feel our way along the walls, inch by inch. That's when we realized the walls were breathing, expanding and contracting, and whispering. Low, garbled voices we couldn't understand. Leo screamed. He said someone had grabbed his ankle. When the lights came back on, he was gone. Just gone. His wristband lay on the floor, still glowing. Room 10 was quiet. Just a long hallway lined with family portraits, except every face was blurred. Except ours. Each painting had one of our faces. Not just posed, either candid shots. Me tying my shoe. Rachel brushing her teeth. Morgan crying on her porch. Photos no one else could have taken. The hallway ended in a door with our names on it. Room 11 was the worst for me. We were separated as soon as we entered. I was in a room that looked like my childhood bedroom. Everything was perfect, down to the poster I had on the wall at age 8. Then I heard my mother's voice. She's been dead for years. She called to me, softly, asked me why I left her alone, why I didn't say goodbye. I shut my eyes and covered my ears, but the voice got louder. It shook the room. The lights flickered. The floor cracked. When the door opened again, I saw Rachel, face pale, eyes wide. She'd been in her childhood home too. We didn't speak, just moved forward. Room 12 was empty, just a staircase. It spiraled downward, endless, carved from stone. We walked for what felt like hours. Rachel asked how many steps we'd taken. I said I'd lost count. Then we saw it. The final door. Room 13. We didn't want to go in. We were trembling, holding each other. Morgan begged us not to open it, but it opened by itself. Inside was a stage, floodlights, a camera, and 5 chairs. 3 were empty. 2 were not. Leo and Dave, but not alive. Both strapped to chairs, heads tilted unnaturally, mouths open in silent screams. Eyes gone. Morgan started screaming. That's when they came out. People in masks. Long robes. No words. They grabbed Morgan first. Then Rachel. They strapped them into the remaining chairs. I tried to fight, but they held me down. One leaned close, whispered in my ear. You've made it to the end. Congratulations. You win. I don't remember leaving. I woke up on the side of a highway at dawn. Mud-caked. Blood-streaked. No sign of the house. No sign of my friends. When I went to the police, they found nothing. Said no such place existed. No records. No bodies. No cameras. Just me. Alone. A year ago, I found it again. Same flyer. Same picture. Same words. Survive all 13 floors and win. This time, I didn't bring friends. This time, I brought fire. But when I got to the spot, it wasn't there. Just empty woods. And a new sign, hammered into the dirt. Players must be new. Previous winners not eligible. I left, but I still have the flyer. And I know someday, somewhere, it will open again. Waiting for the next 5. Waiting for someone like you. It happened in a place called Merrow, Texas. If you've never heard of it, that's no surprise. It's not on any map. Not anymore. A single blinking traffic light, one dusty gas station, a church, and about 50 homes if you count the trailers. My dad was born there, and I spent one summer there when I was 17. That was enough. I haven't been back since. But sometimes, I dream about that place. I dream about what I saw under the church. It started when I got in trouble. Real trouble. My mom thought sending me to live with my dad's side of the family would straighten me out. So she shipped me off to my Uncle Ray's ranch in Merrow, a place with more cows than people and cell service so bad, your phone might as well be a paperweight. Ray wasn't a bad guy. He didn't talk much, but he put me to work. Fixing fences, hauling feed, digging trenches in the heat. It was brutal, but it kept me too tired to mouth off or act out. Still, I hated it. The only distraction I had was Jody, the girl next door. She was the sheriff's daughter, 2 years older than me, and smarter than anyone else in town. She'd sneak over some nights to talk. She didn't laugh much, but when she did, it sounded like something rare and dangerous, like thunder in a drought. One evening, she told me something strange. "You know the church?" she asked, nodding toward the steeple barely visible over the trees. "Yeah," I said. "Creepy old thing." She gave a tight smile. "They say no one's allowed in the basement. Not even Pastor Colburn." I laughed. "So? Probably just storage or something." She didn't laugh back. "No," she said. "People say it goes deeper. Way deeper. And that if you stand on the floor long enough, you can feel it humming." I thought she was messing with me. But then she said, "Don't believe me. Go find out." That was how it started. 2 nights later, I stole a flashlight and snuck out. The church wasn't locked. Nothing in Merrow ever was. The inside smelled like dust, old Bibles, and mildew. The floorboards creaked under my boots. Every step echoed like a gunshot. The door to the basement was behind the pulpit. I found it easily. And just like she said, it had a big chain over it, but no lock. Just a rusted hook holding the chain in place. Like it was more for show than security. I pulled the chain off, opened the door, and descended. The stairs were stone, carved, not poured. Crumbling. The air got colder as I went down, and the smell changed. Something like wet soil and meat left too long in the sun. At the bottom was a narrow hallway, carved straight into the ground. The walls were wet. The deeper I went, the more I felt it. A vibration, like the ground was breathing. Then I heard something. Not footsteps, not voices, just a sound. Low, resonant. Not a growl, but not quite mechanical either. I turned a corner and found a door. Heavy, oak, ancient, and I swear to God, it opened on its own. Inside was a chamber, stone walls, a low ceiling, and a pit. In the center of the room was a circular pit lined with stone, maybe 6 feet across, with a ring of symbols carved around the rim. Inside it was only darkness, but I could hear something moving in there. Slowly, wetly. There was an altar near the edge. Candles burned on it, still lit. Someone had been here recently. Then I saw the bones. Piles of them. Animal, I think. But too many. Way too many. And then I heard the voice. Not out loud. Not in my ears. Inside my head. "You are known. You are seen. You are chosen." I ran. I don't remember getting back to the house. I woke up in my bed the next morning, clothes caked in dirt, flashlight gone. I tried to tell Jody. She didn't seem surprised. "I told you not to go," she said. "They'll come for you now." "Who?" I asked. She just walked away. Things got weirder after that. The townspeople started acting different. Watching me. Staring too long when I passed. Whispering when I walked by. I'd go to the gas station and the clerk would freeze mid-sentence until I left. Then I saw Pastor Colburn outside the church, standing in the rain, unmoving, just staring at my window. I stopped sleeping. One night, I caught Jody at my window. She was crying. "You need to leave," she said. "Now." "What's going on?" I asked. She shook her head. "They pick someone every decade. Someone new. Someone not born here. The ground needs blood." I didn't understand. It sounded insane. Until the next day, when I went to town, and it was empty. No people. No cars. No sounds. Just silence. And every door, every single one, was wide open. Like the town had emptied out in the middle of something. Like they were all waiting for me to notice. I ran back to the ranch. Ray was gone. His truck was gone. But his boots were still by the door. And his wedding ring, something he'd never taken off, even after my aunt died, was sitting on the table. Like he'd taken it off calmly. Voluntarily. Like he'd been called. I packed my bag and ran. I didn't care about the roads. I didn't care about snakes or the heat. I ran into the woods. Kept running until night fell. Then I saw the lights. Torches. Dozens of them. A procession, moving through the trees toward the church. And in the middle of them, a figure. Tall. Thin. with skin like leather and eyes like coal. Not a mask, not a costume. Something older, something watching, something smiling. I hid under a fallen log and didn't breathe. They passed by, and I knew I had one chance. I walked all night and made it to the highway by dawn. A farmer picked me up, took me to a hospital. I told the police a story about getting lost in the woods. I never mentioned Marrow. They wouldn't have found it anyway. Because here's the thing. I tried to go back. A year later, after my mom passed, I drove back out there. The road was gone. The turnoff? Overgrown. Trees where the path used to be. No signs. No markers. Just wilderness. Marrow was gone. Erased. Like it had never been there. But I still dream about the pit. And in my dreams, I hear the voice again. You left, but you still belong to us. And when I wake up, I swear my bed is shaking. Like the ground is breathing. Waiting. We were hunting feral hogs near Loma Alta, a dry stretch of brushland way out in southwest Texas, not far from the border. It was supposed to be a weekend trip, 2 nights, maybe 3. Just a group of buddies drinking beer, shooting rifles, and making noise out in the thorny wild. The group was me, Luis, my cousin, Ray, our driver, and Jasper, Ray's coworker and a guy I barely knew. Jasper had never hunted before. He was more the weird questions and conspiracy theories type. You know the kind, talks too much, carries a compass for no reason, thinks the government is hiding giants in the mountains. I didn't mind. I figured he'd lighten the mood. But by the end of that trip, Jasper was the last person I wanted to see ever again. And one of us never came back. We got to the ranch just before sunset. Ray had arranged access through a friend of a friend who owned a few hundred acres. The land hadn't been touched in years. No fences, no water, just miles of mesquite, cactus, and dead silence. The first night was quiet. We set up camp near an old windmill, grilled sausages over the fire, and watched the stars. The moon was thin, like a broken fingernail. Coyotes howled in the distance. It was perfect. Around midnight, Jasper started acting strange. He wandered off from the fire and stood on a ridge, just staring into the dark. Luis called out to him. You good? Jasper turned slowly. His face was pale, his eyes wide. There's something out there, he said. We all looked. Nothing. Just flat land and brush. You probably saw a deer, Ray said. Jasper shook his head. It was standing upright. Luis and I laughed. What, like Bigfoot? But Jasper wasn't joking. It was watching me, he said. It was breathing heavy, like it was smelling me. We shrugged it off. Too much beer, maybe. Too much imagination. But looking back, that was when everything started to shift. The next morning, we set out at dawn. Hog signs were everywhere. Tracks, scad, even fresh rooting in the dirt. We split into pairs. I went with Luis, Ray with Jasper. After 2 hours, we hadn't seen a single animal. That's when we heard it. One sharp gunshot in the distance. Ray's rifle. We rushed back to camp, thinking they'd gotten something. But they weren't there. We called out. No answer. Their packs were gone, but the cooler was still there. The fire pit was still warm. My gut told me something was wrong. Then we saw Jasper coming up over the ridge. Alone. He was covered in dust and blood. Luis ran to him. What the hell happened? Jasper didn't answer at first. He just collapsed beside the fire and reached for a water bottle. I noticed his hands were shaking. He's gone, he finally said. What do you mean he's gone? I asked. Ray. We were walking near the arroyo. He said he saw something. A figure. Tall. Pale. It wasn't an animal. Then he just went after it. Wait, Luis said. He chased it. Jasper nodded. He dropped his rifle. Ran into the brush like he was hypnotized. Luis and I exchanged a look. None of this made sense. Ray wasn't the kind of guy to lose his cool, especially not out in the brush. If he saw something, he'd shoot it, not run after it unarmed. We decided to look for him, but Jasper refused to come. He's gone, he said again. It took him. That's when I noticed something else. Jasper had Ray's hunting knife clipped to his belt. We spent the next 4 hours searching the arroyo. No sign of Ray. No blood. No boot prints. No trail. Just silence. The kind that felt thick. Watching. When we got back to camp, Jasper was asleep inside the truck. He'd locked the doors. That night, I sat up by the fire, gun in my lap. Luis went to bed around 11, but I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I heard something. Not coyotes. Not wind. Whistling. A slow, deliberate whistle. 3 notes, repeated, coming from the direction of the windmill. I grabbed my light and rifle and stepped into the dark. It stopped as soon as I moved. I scanned the horizon. Nothing. Then I turned back toward camp and froze. Jasper was standing by the fire, staring straight at me. He hadn't made a sound, didn't blink, just stared. "Why are you awake?" I asked. He didn't answer, just smiled and whistled. 3 notes. The same pattern I'd just heard. The next morning, Luis was gone. No blood, no struggle, no prints, just an open tent and his boots still by the flap. Jasper said he hadn't seen anything, but he was wearing Luis's hat. When I asked him about it, he said he gave it to me. I didn't believe him, but I was alone now, 30 miles from the nearest paved road, no phone signal, and only one truck, which Jasper had the keys to. I told him we needed to go. He agreed, smiled, said he'd lead the way. He drove us down a different road than the one we came in on, said it was faster. The landscape started to change, fewer mesquites, more twisted oaks and rocks. The air felt heavier. After about 30 minutes, I realized something. We weren't on a road, just a dirt trail barely wide enough for the truck. I told him to stop. He didn't. "I want to show you something," he said. "Where's Ray?" I asked. He didn't respond. I grabbed the wheel. We fought. The truck skidded and slammed into a tree. Smoke poured from the hood. We both stumbled out. I grabbed my rifle and pointed it at him. "Tell me where they are." He raised his hands and laughed. "You still don't get it, do you?" Then he pointed behind me. "Ask them." I turned and saw them. Ray, Luis, dozens of others, men, women, all pale, wide-eyed, barefoot, standing in a circle around the clearing, all of them smiling, all of them whistling that same 3-note pattern. And in the center of them was something else, a shape, tall, wrong, like a person wearing skin that didn't fit. Its head tilted, arms too long, eyes too black. It moved toward me. I fired. The shot passed through it like smoke. Then everything went dark. I woke up alone, back at the original camp. No truck, no fire, no gear, just a single object beside me. Ray's knife. When I finally made it back to the highway, I was picked up by a rancher. I didn't tell him the full story, just that I got separated from my group. The police searched for weeks. Never found Ray, never found Luis, never found Jasper. They said maybe they got lost, maybe attacked by animals. But I know better. There's something out in that brush, something that takes people, or maybe invites them. And when it finds the right kind of person, the kind that sees something missing in themselves, it gives them a purpose, something to belong to. And sometimes, when I'm alone, I hear it again. 3 notes, whistled softly from the edge of the trees. Waiting.